Hello, welcome to the fruit of Grisaia. Wait, I think I forgot to say I'm Azai. God, that's when you know it's been quite a while since I last recorded an episode. But yeah, welcome back to the fruit of Grisaia. I wanted to record when it was Thursday actually, but the past couple of days have been pretty hectic, or not hectic, but more like busy. On the weekends, I started going back to my sister's place to do sleepovers. I think I'm gonna keep doing that, except for the end of the month, because I do want to do my 100K on the bike. But other than that, yeah, I think Saturdays and Sundays are gonna be hard for me to record any videos. And like Monday till Friday, also going to be quite contested. But I do have a lot of free time though, so no need to worry too much. Last time, the reason I didn't actually record a video was because I was waiting for a package which had ice cream inside of them, and suddenly the seller said, yeah, we're not gonna send it today. Like, what a bitch. But I guess that's okay. I waited at least an hour, and it was a bit too late for me to make an episode or record a video. But alright, without further ado, last time we actually were in Angelic Howl, which is what I call the meat and potatoes. Basically, it's like the main event for Imani's route. So let's continue, shall we? Still on the first day, by the way. Striding her way to an unsteady foothold above us, the captain shouted in a voice that resounded off the walls of rock. At her feet, the food and camping equipment we had dragged out of the bus were piled in a heap. In the dark cloud of bad luck that was our bus accident, our meager silver lining of good fortune was that we had been returning from a camping trip. Among the luggage we'd collected from the bus, there was a variety of camping equipment, as well as leftover ingredients from the meal we'd made the day before. There were 4 tents designed for 3 occupants, and 1 large tent made for 6. Kazuki and I took one of the smaller tents, 2 sleeping bags, and a mat for both of us. Our rations for the 3-day period were distributed to us in a garbage bag.
That
she said it was 1 sleeping bag per tent. Did I make a mistake? 2 people per tent, 1 sleeping bag per person. Okay. I read that incorrectly. As she spoke, the captain glanced briefly around the group, then brought her gaze to a halt on Kazuki, who was standing at my side. The last understood was probably directed at her in particular. Did she not notice Captain Sakashita's hostile attitude? Did she notice and play dumb on purpose? Whatever the case. Kazuki answered in a high-pitched, girly tone that seemed to originate from her nose.
Eh? 食材は人参に玉ねぎにじゃがいも。これって明らかに昨日作ったカレーの食材の余りよね。 カレー粉もあるけど少ないわね。どうしよう。待って待って、貴重な食材なのよ。大丈夫なの？まあ料理なんて煮るか焼くか蒸すかでしょ。きっと簡単よ。いや、いい、私がやるから任せて。でもあなたにはテントを。いいのよ、私こう見えても一応実家が料理屋だから料理にはちょっと自信あるし。そう？でもなんか悪いわ、あなたばかり働かせて。じゃあテントを張り終わったら一緒に料理しましょう。手伝ってくれる？あ、それはいいわね。なんだか仲のいいお友達って感じで。でしょ？ところであなた、お塩を使わない料理ってできる？どういう意味？言葉の通りだけれど。お塩ならあるじゃない。ほら。だからそれをできるだけ使わないでほしいのだけれど。無理？まあ無理ではないけど、お塩がないと美味しくないよ。その辺は我慢しましょうね。いいけど。
After erecting our tent, I gave saltless cooking a try as Kazuki requested. Cooking the onions in a fry pan, I mixed them with smashed steamed potatoes and flavored the mix with pepper, then molded it into an oval and baked it in butter, pretty much making it up as I went along. You know, there's also... isn't butter already super salty? Or maybe it's like unsalted butter. What would you even call this thing? A potato burger? A croquette without meat or sauce? Anyway, kind of an unorthodox result. Although I was frankly a little wary myself, it was pretty good when I actually ate it, and Kazuki also happily praised the taste. By some mysterious psychological process, I found that Kazuki's praise motivated me to try hard next time as well. Ridiculous as it may sound, I'm fairly sure I was beginning to genuinely like this girl named Kazami Kazuki. When the sun set, the sultry heat and humidity of the day vanished quickly, giving way to a chilly night. Nonetheless, I hadn't entered my tent yet. My agitation from this overwhelming barrage of events hadn't yet cooled, so I wasn't exactly sleepy. And I think I may have still been slightly resistant to the idea of entering that tent alone with Kazami Kazuki. When I looked up, there was a slight sliver of moonlight working its way to us through a gap in the treetops. Amidst the darkness at the bottom of the ravine, I could just make out the domed shapes of our tents here and there. Man, lots of tricky words in these sentences lately. Or maybe it's because I haven't been, recording as much as I want. You know, kind of got a bit stale or out of practice. The only one in which a light was burning was the largest tent. That 6-person tent was occupied by our advisor, Mr. Ochi, along with the wounded Hiroka-san and Sakurai-san. Okay. You guys probably hear that, or not, I'm not sure, but there's like a very small sound of people like crying and kind of screaming a tiny bit. The dim light of a lantern projected the movement of the inhabitants as shadows on the wall, and an agonized moaning leaked from inside. It was a voice like that of a damned soul crawling through hell. Probably Hiroka-san and her fractured legs. When Kazuki went to check on her after dinner, Hiroka-san had been bathed in greasy sweat. The entire time we were there, she kept up a low, groaning cry, never managing coherent speech. The fractures had given rise to an agonizing fever. She had no method of coping with her suffering except to scream and moan. Knowing that we had to get her to a hospital as soon as possible, I also knew that we had been placed in circumstances where we could do nothing but wait for help. Frustrated impatience boiled up inside me. The food distributed to us by the captain's orders was to last 3 days, which meant that, at the very least, she intended to have us spend 3 days here. But what was to come after that? What happened if 3 days passed and no one arrived to save us? As worsening tremors of anxiety crawled their way up to my spine, I shivered for reasons unrelated to the temperature of my body. Our bus had fallen. Some of us had already died, but even so, something in the core of my mind seemed to be anesthetized against that truth. None of it felt fully real. That sense of numbness was what frightened me the most. What should we do? How do we survive this? No matter how frantically I tried to find answers, my mind was paralyzed, dominated by a single thought. We can't do anything. What will be, will be. As if rejecting the hopeless situation it had found itself in, my brain was simply refusing to think. That refusal of reality may have been a common phenomenon among us that night. From some other tent in the area, I heard the incongruous sound of brightly laughing voices. That laughter grated badly on my nerves. I couldn't help but turn my head toward the sound in irritation. Perhaps Kazuki, sitting next to me, felt the same way. As she likewise turned her gaze toward the laughter, there was a scowl on her face.
ねえ、風見さん。和樹でいいわ。そう言ったと思うけど。和樹。何あまね。あなたは今、何を考えているの？別に何も。本を読んでいたところよ。本？
There was nothing in Kazuki's hands. Even if there had somehow been a book there, it would have been impossible to read in the darkness.
あなたにはまだ言ってなかったかしら。私ね、一度見た本の内容を絵として頭に記憶しておいて、後から文字として認識することで好きな時に読むことができるの。
Man, I wonder if people do have, like, these sort of things. I mean, I understand people have photographic memory, but those are, like, super rare, and I have actually never met anyone that have the ability. So I can't really say I know much about the ability myself.
え、ごめん、意味がわからない。どういうこと？つまり、開いた本のページをカメラで撮影して、後でその写真を見ることで内容を読むことができる。そういえばわかりやすいかしら？私の頭の中にはまだ読んでいない本が144冊残っていたから、そのうちの1冊を読んでいたところ。
I do wonder, though, if that is how photographic memory works. I'm not exactly too sure. I think I said about similar stuff when we were talking about this during Makina's ability. She said she had this sort of ability too, right? But that was like a long time ago. What the heck was I supposed to say to that? Could the geniuses of the world all do things like this? No, that was the wrong way to look at it. It's probably precisely when you can do something so utterly removed from the capabilities of other people that you deserve to be called a genius. I was confident there was simply no way I could ever pull off something like that, no matter how well she explained it to me.
何の本を読んでいたの？地震で倒壊した学園の中に取り残された15人の男女学生を描いたフィクションノベル。へえ。閉鎖空間に取り残された学生という設定が今の私たちの状況に近いし、何かの参考になるかと思って読んではみたけれど、ダメね。
I
あまり
kinda
有用
doubt
な情
that.
報は得られなかったわ。
Kinda doubt she didn't actually gain any information. At the very least, she would know the ending of the novel, right? On the point of asking about the ending of that novel, I abruptly clammed my mouth shut. Even without asking, I had a rough idea. Most likely, the students in that story were wiped out. That was probably the exact reason Kazuki had vaguely described it as not particularly useful. Are you sure about that, Amane? I mean, if I was Kazuki, and she did say she wants people, or at least everyone, to be out, right? I think she would at least... Like, what I'm trying to say is that the ending probably is just not in accordance to what she wanted, which is not everyone escaped. But I would say at least a couple escaped. Or survived. Kazuki turned her face to me with a sleepy expression, admittedly her default state, stifled a small yawn and mumbled, "It'll be 10 soon," without a glance at any clock or watch.
することもないし、そろそろ寝ましょうか。うん。
It was certainly true that staying up any later wasn't going to accomplish anything, and just being awake with nothing to do would invite unproductive, depressing thoughts. I understood that, but I simply wasn't sleepy. Indifferent to my minor dilemma, Kazuki stood up immediately and opened the zipper, dividing the entrance to our tent.
ねえ和樹、はい、あなたは不安じゃないの？ああ、それはいい質問ね。そんなあなたの問いにずっと前から用意しておいた答えがあるのだけれど、聞く？バスの事故に遭うことも、こうしてあなたとペアを組むことも、そしてあなたがこの時間にその質問をすることも、私の中では全て想定内よ。どう？一応天才風にかっこよく決めたつもりだったのだけれど。一応私は真面目な質問をしたつもりなんだけど。だから私も真面目に答えたじゃない。もう寝ましょう。明日は明日できっとまた忙しくなるだろうし。
I guess in a roundabout way, that's saying that, yeah, this is something that I don't really consider worth being scared or anxious about. With those words, Kazuki dropped to all fours and began to burrow her way into the tent like a bear returning to its den. In a blank daze, I watched Kazuki's round butt wriggling under her skirt as she disappeared inside. I found myself alone, trying and failing to process the meaning of her words.
なんか今のでどっと疲れが出た感じ。
Confronted with the reality of Kazami Kazuki, a girl who looked at first as if she wasn't thinking at all, a girl who kept her thoughts completely unreadable, I found myself feeling ridiculous in comparison. The way I drowned myself in anxious worrying, the way I worked myself into a panic over things I had no control over. Left alone in that dark and silent place, I strained my ears. Hiroka-san's moans, which ate into the heart of the listener, and the voices of laughter, with their grating denial of our danger, both had stopped for now. The occasional rustling of trees in the wind and the voices of insects were the only sounds left to echo against the walls of rock. Damn, she woke up super late. I assume this is the next day, right? The second day in the valley. That morning, I awoke to the eerie song of distant birds. This is not morning, Imani. 11:52 is not morning. I had burrowed into my sleeping bag and closed my eyes, fully expecting to lie awake all night. But evidently, I must have dozed off at some point. When I forced open my unexpectedly heavy eyelids, I found the interior of our cheap blue tent illuminated by a slanting ray of morning sun. Thankfully, the temperature had risen with the dawn. I must have slept for at least, yeah, that's a typo, a few hours, but the burden of my fatigue was no lighter. If anything, I felt even more exhausted than I had been the night before. Still wrapped in my sleeping bag, I turned sideways on top of my thin silver mat, twisting my head toward the other side of the tent. I was surprised to find my roommate missing. Kazuki? Where could she have wandered off to? The mat and sleeping bag Kazuki had been using sat on the ground next to me, neatly tied together in a tight roll. From the look of things, it was unlikely she just stepped out to use the bathroom. Kazuki was clearly already awake and taking action. I crawled outside the tent into a clear-skied but dim morning. 11:52 is not morning, damn it, Imani. But I guess it's either she doesn't know the time or she's still half asleep. I wouldn't consider 11:52 morning at all. That's like almost afternoon. The sheer cliffs to our right and left intercepted most of the sun's light. What little reached us filtered down through gaps in the thick vegetation far above. No doubt the same reason it felt oddly chilly for a summer day. Others had already emerged from their tents into the gloomy dawn. Here and there, they sat quietly on the hard stone ground. In addition to the trauma and mental exhaustion of the previous day, we'd slept in an unfamiliar environment. Not the best way to get rested and refreshed. Most had barely slept at all, judging from the dark circles under their eyes.
ねえ、和樹を見なかった？
I called out to a freshman from the neighboring tent, Ibuki Haruna, seated some 3 meters away. Ibuki brushed her long bangs out of her eyes with her fingers and responded listlessly.
和樹？ああ、風見さんならシャベルを担いで森の方に行ったからおトイレじゃないかな。
そう。
I turned toward the valley's lone exit, but the tangle of vegetation we called a forest. But Kazuki was nowhere in sight. I did, however, happen to notice someone acting rather oddly a little way off. That's supposed to be ways.
ねえ、あれ、何やってるのかな？
そう。
It was Sakuma Minori, a third-year senior. She was a talented athlete, particularly skilled at sinking three-pointers, who'd earned the title of scoring queen in our team. At the moment, she was repeatedly hurling a small object straight up into the air.
気になるなら自分で聞いてきたら？私、あの先輩苦手。
Ibuki didn't bother to lower her voice. She didn't seem to care whether her frank words might reach the ears of our senior. As a result of last night's discussion, she'd been paired with that very Sakuma-senpai, and was stuck sharing a tent with her for the duration of our stay here. The combination seemed logical enough, since Ibuki and Sakuma had been sharing a room as boarder students. But room assignments in the dorm were arbitrary, arranged for the convenience of the school. As in most boarding schools, the freshmen tended to moan about running chores with their arrogant older roommates, while seniors complained about being expected to clean up after some clueless brat. If you're stuck living in the same room for an extended period of time, the reasonable thing would be to deal with your differences and find a way to get along. But it seems things aren't that simple, particularly for girls. And the roommates who disliked each other most tended to be exactly the ones who were kept together when rooms were reassigned the next year. It wasn't just coincidence either. From what I'd heard, our school deliberately tried to create awkward combinations as a sneaky way of maintaining discipline. I think that's actually a good way to maintain discipline, to be fair. Letting friends clump together naturally leads to cliques and group attempts to skirt the rules. I agree with that too. In turn, this can create sharp divisions between those who want peace and quiet in the dorm and those who want to enjoy themselves. Sometimes these would end in nasty squabbles. In other words, the mixing of oil and water personalities in individual rooms prevented larger-scale problems. Or so I'd heard. As someone who commuted to school, it was a bit hard for me to understand dorm politics.
佐久間先輩、さっきから何をなさってるんですか？
おお、あまねか。これだこれ。
Sakuma held out a small object that she'd been hurling repeatedly into the sky. Specifically, it was her cell phone. She'd been repeating a simple pattern of action, throwing it straight up with all her might, retrieving it on the way back down, then throwing it right back up again. On closer examination, the body of the phone was battered and covered in fine cracks. She probably dropped it numerous times by now.
昨日の夜、眠る前に思いついたんだけどね。メールを送信したまま空に投げれば、うまいこと圏内に入って助けが呼べるんじゃないかなと思ってさ。
I mean, to some degree, that seems plausible.
今朝からずっと試してるんだけど。よっと。
With a fluid overhand motion, Sakuma launched the cell phone into the sky once again.
それ、すごくいいアイデアじゃないですか。
だろ？私もそう思ったんだけど。おっと。
Skillfully catching the cell phone as it plunged back to Earth, she flipped on the screen and checked the status of the transmission.
また失敗か。もう50回ぐらい投げてるけど、一度も成功しないよ。やっぱり、風見の言う通りなのかもな。
You could try other people's cell phone, you know. Other people's provider might actually, you know, like help.
和樹はなんて？
ただでさえ電波が届きにくい環境の上に、もし圏内に投げ込むことができたとしても、送信する前に落下してしまえば意味がないってさ。
だったら携帯が戻ってこないように崖の上まで投げちゃえばいいじゃないですか。
はあ？
私だってそう思ったさ。さっきから投げてるのは 崖の上に乗せてしまおうと思って投げてるんだけど、届
Oh,
かないんだよ。
okay, okay. I thought like, huh? Amane, are you dumb? There's no cliff here. Oh, she's talking about like throwing it as far as the top of the cliff. Although I couldn't tell the exact height of the cliff she was aiming for, a conservative estimate would be 50 meters. And since the wall sloped over us, some fairly precise aim would be required to land it on top.
後で何かうまい方法を考えると風見は言っていたけど、守備よく崖の上に乗せることができたとしても、そこが圏内である保証はないってさ。
True.
そうですか。
I'd hit on the idea of making a crud sling out of a towel or something to throw the phone over the cliff. But it was true enough. There was no evidence we'd be accomplishing anything even if it worked. If there wasn't any signal up there either, we'd end up throwing away a valuable potential means of communication for nothing. Wrong! That's not how I see it. Like, it's pretty useless in the first place to rely on a cell phone for communication anyway. And if you keep it for longer than what? I don't know how long older cell phones used to last, but cell phone nowadays, if you use it for about a day, it's basically dead without you charging on it. At least unless you turn on like battery saving mode or airplane mode. But even then, I think you can spare one cell phone. How many people do you guys have? I think like 11, right? One cell phone just to give it a shot? I don't think that's a waste at all. And yet, Sakuma was keeping at her task relentlessly, probably mostly for the sake of having something to do. She seemed to know full well that it was essentially hopeless.
それで、その、和樹を見かけませんでしたか？
ん？風見なら、さっき大きなシャベルを抱えて森に入っていったよ。30分ぐらい前かな。トイレにしては長いね。
ちょっと私、様子を見に行ってこようかと思います。
気をつけた方がいいよ。さっき私も森に入ってみたんだけど、道なんてどこにもないし、周りは木ばっかりで目印がないからすぐに迷う。何か分かりやすい目印をつけながら行った方がいい。はい、
わかりました。気をつけます。
It'd already been half an hour since Kazuki entered the forest. Definitely way too long for a bathroom break. It was hard to imagine Kazami Kazuki, of all people, making such a careless blunder. But there was a possibility she'd lost her bearings and wandered in the wrong direction. I cautiously made my way into the forest, using the blade of a can opener to mark tree trunks with arrows as I went. See, I think Amane has the right idea, like making markings like that. I tried shouting her name, but there was no reply. I studied the ground at my feet. Although trampled vegetation made it clear that some of us had been in this area recently, the trails were indistinct. Not that I could tell which belonged to Kazuki in the first place. When I glanced behind me, I found the route I trampled through the high grass was still very clear by comparison. Surprisingly, however, it was a meandering zigzag, probably the result of constantly winding my way around trees. I thought I was walking perfectly straight too. This is what makes the wilderness a truly terrifying place. I thought I had a pretty good sense of the dangers of wild mountains from books and comics, but now that I was actually experiencing one, I was quickly coming to realize how badly mistaken I'd been. I'd gone in believing that getting lost in the woods would generally work out for the best, so long as you reacted appropriately. That naive thought dissolved in mere minutes inside the jungle. In an environment utterly barren of any trace of other human beings, your sense of isolation quickly builds into anxiety. It becomes easy to rush into action based on unfounded, optimistic assumptions. It's got to be this way. It was probably over there. Shying away from acknowledging the worst-case scenario, running around on your intuition alone, you become truly and hopelessly lost. In time, your anxiety reaches a new stage. Am I simply wasting my energy wandering around in circles? An even worse fear, because it's paralyzing. You're frozen where you stand, trapped with your own slowly escalating terror. And eventually, the fear of death creeps up on you, breaking your courage and robbing you of reason. In the end, just such an outcome is entirely likely.
Kazuki! どこにいるの?
It hadn't been 10 minutes since I entered the forest, and I could already feel myself trembling. I'd begun to sink into the first stage, powerful anxiety at my own isolation. I screamed Kazuki's name for the second time, a little louder than before.
どうしよう。
You know, I was gonna rebuke what Amane said like a whole lot, but then again, I am a third-person observer. If I was actually in this crash, in this accident, and wandering around in the forest, I don't actually know how I would react. Like, logically, of course, what I say is still, as I said the previous episode, about how I probably try to mark my way inside of the forest and see if I can find a way out. But I never did consider what would happen if I were lost for more than one day. Right? And you know, like the fear of actually sleeping alone, and maybe wild animals will like kill you during your sleep would probably make me anxious. I don't know. But the fact that there is no animal trail makes it seem like super weird, right? I feel like this is very awkward that the forest this dense doesn't have any wildlife. That's the unreasonable part of this whole scenario, I feel. Because if there is at least wildlife, we can probably try to hunt them to make them as food. So that would solve at least our ration problem. Maybe it would be smarter to return for now while I still know the way back, then launch an organized search with someone else. But just as these thoughts were running through my head, I heard the rustling sound of someone stepping their way through the high grass a few paces behind me. My body went stiff with shock. I spun around to find that Kazami Kazuki had materialized out of nowhere, the usual vaguely sleepy expression on her face.
人の名前をあまり大きな声で叫ばないでもらえる？ファンに取り囲まれたら面倒じゃない。カズキ！そう、風見和樹よ。サインが欲しいのならマネージャーを通して事務所に色紙を送ってちょうだい。何？色紙？いや、だからここであなたはアイドル気取りかって突っ込んでくれないとボケゾンってやつじゃない。あ、そうか、ごめん。いいわよ別に。それほど面白い冗談だとも思ってなかったし。カズキ、どこに行ってたの？トイレよ。一人でゆっくり用を足すこともできないなんて、まさにアイドルのようだと思ったから口にした冗談だったのだけれど。トイレにしては遅いじゃない。30分も頑張ってたの？
I mean, it really depends on the person, but I've been in the toilet for 30 minutes.
ついでだから食べられそうな草を摘んでいたのよ。ほら。
Kazuki held out some small, unfamiliar vegetables. They seemed to be immature shoots of some leafy plant.
山菜でも生えていればと思って探してみたけれど、こんなものしか見つからなかったわ。何それ、食べられるの？草ソテツのわかめよ。一応生でも食べられるけど、おひたしとかにした方がいいわね。へえ、こんなの初めて見た。あんまり美味しそうじゃないけど。ろくな食べ物がないから、それらを餌にする野生動物も当然いない。鳥の声はするけど、その姿は見えない。熊に襲われる心配がないのはありがたいけれど、改めてひどい環境だと思い知ったわ。とりあえず朝食はこれで済ませましょう。調理法は任せるけど、調味料の類はできるだけ節約して。
See, if I were to know that there wouldn't be any bears lurking around, I definitely would have taken my chance going through the forest. Since at the very least, if I'm tired, I would be relieved enough to not feel scared about going to sleep. But then again, that is still not like 100% proof, right? There might still be bears out there. But I don't know, from what she's saying, it seems to be like there's no wildlife except for the birds, which is super strange.
食材ならまだじゃがいもも人参も残ってるけど、日持ちのするものはできるだけ残しておきたいの。3日でここを脱出できるとは限らないのだし。そっか、そうだよね。そんなにがっかりしないで。確かに絶望的ではあるけれど、助からないと決まったわけではないから。私たち助かるの？どうかしら。別にはぐらかすわけではないけれど、さすがの私にもまだわからないわね。私たちが助かる方法ってあるの？あるわよ。どんな方法？何？あるんでしょ？方法が。あるにはあるけれど、まだ無理。無理ってどういう意味？今の私たちでは実現不可能という意味よ。ごめん、私バカだから意味がわからない。今は無理ってどういうこと？時間が経てば可能になるってこと？そういうこと。それに救助が来る可能性もまだ残っているし、今はただじっと耐えるしかないわ。ねえ、どんな方法なの？ヒントだけでも教えてよ。人間が死なないために必要なものってなんだ？
Well, the basic needs, right? Food, shelter. What was the last one? I actually forgot.
水？あ、思い出した。さっき草を摘んでいるとき、湧き水が湧いている場所を見つけたの。というわけで、飲み水の心配は不要よ。
Okay, that's fair.
なんだ、お水か。そうがっかりしたものでもないわよ。水があれば1週間は生きられるもの。部長にはあなたが発見したって報告してくれる？
I mean, if you were on the fat side, you can actually last more than a week, I'd say.
それは構わないけど。じゃあ戻りましょうか。あ、待って、私まだヒントの答え聞いてないよ。人間が生きていくのに必要なものって何？食べ物よ。食べ物？それが助かるためのヒント？そういうこと。だからできるだけ接触しておく必要があるの。それでみんなが助かるの？全員が助かるとは一言も言ってないでしょ。え？もう戻りましょう。あまり遅くなるとみんなが心配するわ。あ、和樹！大丈夫よ。帰り道は完璧に覚えているから。私についてきなさい。待ってよ、和樹！わお、すごい剣幕ね。何をそんなに怒っているの？ワオじゃないわよ。全員は助からないってどういう意味？そういう可能性もあるという意味よ。早い段階で救助が来ればもちろん全員助かるわ。
Yeah, her anger is a bit what is it? Damn it, English, why are you so hard right now? Unprompted? I think that's the word.
じゃあ、もし救助が来なかったら？それはその時に考えればいいことよ。編成された救助隊の捜索が打ち切られるのは早くて5日、遅くても14日。1週間経っても救助が来なければその時に考えましょう。みんなで。そんなに心配しなくても あなたはかなりの確率で生き残るはずよ。
どんな根拠で？
そんなの決まっているでしょ。私のパートナーに選ばれたからよ。
本気で言ってるのそれ？
もちろん本気です。さて、質問は以上かしら？よろしい。では戻りましょう。
もう勝手にズンズン行かないで。
面倒な子ね。不安だから手をつないでほしいのならはっきりとそう言いなさいの。
Most people aren't really that straightforward, Kazuki.
別にそういうわけじゃ。
あらそう。じゃあいいのね。手をつながなくて。
つなぐ。
はい、お声が遠いのですが。
つなぎます。手をつながせてください、和樹様。
あら、いい子ね。いらっしゃい、あまねちゃん。
もうこれからは勝手に一人で行動しないで。私心配したんだよ。
I do wonder though whether she was worried for her sake or her own safety.
あなたが私を？
そりゃさ、私ごときがおこがましいとは思うけど。
いえ、そういう意味ではなくて、むしろ私を心配してくれる人がいることに驚いたというか。でもそうね、ごめんなさい。そんな顔しないで。まるで母親に置いていかれた子供みたいな顔じゃない。大丈夫。あなたを置いてどこにも行きはしないから。
約束？
Yeah, I feel like Amane really is like a kid that's trying to latch on to Kazuki right now. I personally, if I were in Kazuki's shoes, I'd probably shoo her off. But like I said, I'm not a good person, and I think Kazuki is an actual good person. Even though she might seem like very harsh on the outside.
ええ、約束するわ。さ、戻りましょう。
Since I was physically sturdy, I was usually the one being relied on by others. But at that moment, I realized I'd grown totally dependent on that diminutive girl, Kazami Kazuki. I wasn't used to leaning on others like a crutch. Clinging to someone usually made me feel more awkward than anything else. But that day, the distinct warmth of Kazuki's small hand was very reassuring.
冷たい手をしているのね、あまね。
ごめん。
いいのよ。私の母親もこんな感じの手だから。
私のことお母さんって呼んでもいいのよ。
あら、言うようになったわね。
Kazuki guided me by the hand back out of the forest. When we returned to the camp, we found everyone gathered in front of the tents, discussing plans for the future and proposing escape strategies. Of course, we were students from a school for rich young ladies. We loaned only the superficial appearance of maturity. Producing a perfect smile for a polite good day was the extent of the practical, non-academic knowledge we'd gained there. As such, experience wasn't exactly of much use here. The majority of the ideas were unrealistic, founded on the assumption the world would arrange itself for our convenience. If anything, it could be called good fortune that a few halfway decent-sounding thoughts were mixed in. For example, Sakuma's throwing his cell phone into the sky. However, the majority of these more worthwhile plans had already been tried out by the person who brought them up, all with little success. In this life-and-death situation, everyone tossed out any idea that popped into their head, grasping at straws in a desperate search for hope. But when someone proposed we capture the bird and wrap a letter around its leg asking for help, Captain Sakashida finally lost her temper at the sheer absurdity.
あなたたち、少しは真面目に考えたらどうなの？そんな、私たちだって必死に考えてその程度なの。小学生だってもう少しまともな意見を口にするわよ。それとも何？この次はどうやって鳥を捕まえるかという議題で話し合うつもり？
Man, I really hate these type of people that can just shot down, you know, like they shoot down whatever plans that people say, or what are they talking about, like They're shooting down solutions that, yeah, sure, it might sound absurd, but if you don't have anything to actually contribute, don't shoot them down. Like, might as well just fantasize. True, maybe it's fantasizing, but what? You got any better ideas, Captain Sakashita?
何よそんな言い方しなくたってね。確か
Oh,
に
sorry.
一番必死なのは坂下かもね。私たちよりまともな意見があるなら言えばいいの。
Yeah, that's fair. The stage whispers of her critiques naturally reached Captain Sakashita's ears, as they were intended to.
あなたたち、言いたいことがあるならはっきりと言いなさいな。そんな陰口のように恥ずかしくはないの？
I don't think they were backbiting in the shadows if they're actually saying that in front of your face right now. Captain Sakashita's irritated, impatient tone was no different from her usual scoldings during practice. But at that moment, we weren't in that usual situation. Tucked away in our safe gymnasium, it was a life or death emergency, and everyone was frantic. At such times, people instinctively seek out someone to rely on. The more desperate the situation, the more we throw aside rank and title and turn to raw competence. It felt like many gazes were beginning to concentrate in Kazuki's general direction. I don't think it was just my imagination. Captain Sakashita seemed to have noticed as well. Swallowed by what looked like an overwhelming surge of irritation, she abruptly grabbed a nearby fist-sized outcropping of rock, then squeezed it so hard her fingers turned white. This isn't good. We weren't going to achieve anything by continuing this attack on Captain Sakashita, and I think we all knew that. Even so, I understood the temptation to create a scapegoat. The irrational feeling that pushing all the bitterness and blame onto another would wipe away our own shortcomings, as if doing so would save us somehow. For most of the team members, the captain had become the scapegoat, and for the captain, it must have been Kazuki who filled that role. As the main authority figure, our advisor, Mr. Ochi, probably should have interceded by now, but he seemed intent on staying out of the conversation under the pretext of attending to the wounded. He'd never made a habit of intervening in the team's quarrels, a policy typical of teachers at all-female schools, who know full well what a nuisance it is to get caught in the crossfire of a schoolgirl squabble. His normal approach was to smooth things over with the individuals involved after the fight died down. He was probably assuming that would be enough this time as well. What should we do? Not that I really have grounds to criticize his passivity, there we go. In yen, I glanced pleadingly at Kazuki out of the corner of my eye, hoping she would rescue us from this ugly situation. Apparently reading my mind from that small movement, Kazuki let out a short, resigned sigh, then slowly opened her mouth to speak.
もうその辺にしておきなさい。バカを相手に喧嘩をする人が一番バカよ。
その言葉、私に言ったの？それとも彼女たちに？
If you feel like it was directed at you, then it's probably directed at you, Captain Sakashita. Jeez.
みんなに言ったのよ。あなたにはどう聞こえた？
Exactly, it's up to interpretation.
そういうあなたはさっきからずっと黙っているようだけど、何かいいアイデアはないのかしら？
God, every time she talks, her way of talking is already so obnoxious. It's making me actually hate this girl.
おとなしく救助を待つという提案が一番最初に決まったはずですが。
何もしないでただ救助を待つというの？いつ来るかもわからない救助を。
いつ来るかわからないから無駄に体力を消耗したくないのです。幸いなことにスオさんのおかげで水源は確保できたことですし、接触すればしばらくは持ちこたえられますが、それとも。
Kazuki covered her mouth with her hand and narrowed her eyes in apparent amusement.
それとも、以前私が申し上げたように、一か八かの賭けに出て、あの密林に足を踏み入れて脱出を試みますか？
As she spoke, Kazuki jerked her head in the direction of the overgrown, humid jungle sealing our only exit from the valley. Even from a distance, the tangled mass of plants exuded the indifferent menace of nature.
それは。
The captain had emphatically shot down the suggestion only yesterday. Overturning that decision now was probably impossible. Cold sweat forming at my temples, I watched nervously as the captain's face changed color to an extremely disturbing shade of red. But in the next moment, Kazuki shot me a quick, suggestive glance. Oh, I get it. I abruptly jerked my hand into the air as if requesting a teacher's attention in the classroom.
よろしいでしょうか。
何かしら、スオさん。
やっぱり部長がおっしゃったように部活に森に入るのは危険だと思います。
それはもう誰もが理解していることよ。
ですからとりあえず1週間この場で思いつく限りのアイデアを試しながら救助を待つというのはどうでしょう。
どうして1週間なの？
この手の遭難事故の場合、だいたい2週間で捜索が打ち切られるそうです。ですから1週間待ってみて救助が来ない場合は、その時にまたこちらから行動を起こすアイデアを話し合いましょう。
それを今話し合っているのでしょ？あなた何を言っているの？
それは
どうして1週間後にも今日と同じ体力が残っていると思えるのかしら。不思議。
何ですって？
I turned my head slightly to the side and shot Kazuki a brief glare. Not that she even noticed, judging from her unruffled, perfectly indifferent expression.
いやでもまあつまりはそういうことです。とにかく1週間思いつく限りの手段で SOS を発信しながら救助を待って、それでも救助が来なかったらその時の体力や食料事情に応じた対策を話し合いましょう。
まあいいわ。確かに今はそれぐらいしかできることもなさそうだし。それでよろしいですね、先生。
ああ、とりあえずはそれでいいだろう。
では最後に私からの忠告です。各自アイデアを出して実行するのは構いませんが、決して無茶のない範囲で行動するように。崖に足場を掘りながらよじ登るとか、そういった危険が伴うアイデアはくれぐれも実行しないように。以上。
With those clipped words of warning, the discussion finally ended, taking with it the tension that had hung thick in the air for so long. The rest of the group quickly broke up into their assigned pairs, whispering furtively to each other as they walked away from the meeting place. Of course, I was no exception. As Kazuki promptly stood up from her seat and made to leave, I chased after her and immediately offered a few words of complaint.
ちょっと、さっきのはひどくない？
あら、何のこと？
また私に重要な発言を丸投げしたでしょ。私、和樹の腹話術人形じゃないんだからね。
変ね。私、あなたに何か言えと命令した覚えは全くないのだけれど。
Exactly. I mean, if she didn't want to say it, she doesn't have to. I guess she was put on the spot, though. And technically, Kazuki is smart enough to know her personality that she would speak up without needing to order her to.
言わなくてもわかるわよ。それに目で合図したじゃない。
確かに合図は送ったけれど、まさかああも敏感に感じ取ってもらえるとは思ってもいなかったから、私もう嬉しくて。今日は一日ニコニコしていると思うけど、気持ち悪いとか思われないか心配だわ。
なんかいろんな意味で気持ち悪いのは確かね。
あまね、私はあなたがとても気に入ったわ。もし私が男なら間違いなくあなたにプロポーズしているわよ。
やめてよ、私そっちの趣味ないし。
大丈夫。私にも今のところそっちの趣味はないから。
今のところって。
Is she implying there's a chance she'll swing that way in the future?
まあ、絶対にないとは言えないわね。
I mean, pretty easy enough to, follow her train of thought.
だから私の心を先読みして会話をしないでよ。
何にせよ、あなたのおかげで話がうまくまとまったのだから1000の感謝を送りたいわ。
さいですか。そりゃよござんしたね。
それでもやはり残る懸念はあの部長ね。やっぱり私、あの子が嫌いだわ。は
っきり言うな。確かにちょっと上から目線が鼻につくけど、基本的に悪い先輩ではないと思うけど。
While her tone tended to be harsh, her directions during practice were appropriate and reasonable, and she cared more about the members of her team than you might assume. Currently, she was in a far more taxing situation than captaining a school team could have possibly prepared her for. Taking that into consideration, you could say she was coping fairly calmly.
確かにそうかもしれない。でも仮にも部という一つの組織をまとめる長なのだから、せめてブレインストーミングぐらいは理解していてほしいのだけれど。
何？
ブレインストーミングよ。
She didn't say an English word, damn it.
何それ？
ググりなさい。
Is that not gonna get you, you know, like I don't know. Can you actually say that?
説明が面倒な時の合言葉よ。でもまあそうね。通信手段が途絶している今この場では酷な言葉ね。まあ簡単に説明してしまうと4つの原則があるの。
I mean, I don't think brainstorming is that uncommon of a word, is it? But then again, I don't know how the Japanese actually study. But I assume that even though a lot of people that are Japanese cannot, or I don't know if they actually cannot speak the language that well, or if they're just, you know, feigning speaking it badly. I don't know, but like they should at least have very good knowledge about written English, right? And I don't think, like I said, brainstorming is that uncommon of a word. I don't know though. I don't study in Japan.
1、決めつけない。2、否定せずに何でも受け入れる。3、とにかく数を出す。4、結合する。以上の4つよ。
Okay, I actually did not know that brainstorming includes these 4 principles though.
つまり、どんなにくだらない意見でも否定せずにとりあえず聞いてみて。一見して無駄のように思える意見でも他の意見と組み合わせることで有効な意見にできないかを考える。それがブレインストーミングよ。
おお、なんか天才っぽい。
茶化さないの。結構真面目な話をしているのだから。
ごめん。それで？
さっきの話し合いで彼女は他人の意見に否定をぶつけるだけで何一つ建設的な意見は口にしなかったでしょ。そう。例えば火を起こしてのろしを上げるとか、いっそ森に火をつけるとか。そんな意見に彼女は何て答えたかしら？
それは確かもう試してみて効果がなかったんじゃなかったっけ？のろしの煙は重なった木々の枝で分散されちゃうし、山火事の場合は冬場ならともかく今の季節は森自体の湿度が高くてジメジメしてるから無理だって。
I find this very unlikely. I don't know if you guys know Japanese summers, but it is insanely hot. I mean, I've never been in the jungle in Japan, or yeah, I've never been to a jungle, in fact, in real life, but I assume the temperature wouldn't be as much different, right? I don't know though. Maybe it is. But it goes up to like 35 to 38 degrees in summer, maybe sometimes upwards of 40. I would assume that it would be easy to start a forest fire, especially in summer. See, the whole thing about this forest being like this is, in my mind, it's just like super unreasonable, but then again, it is fiction.
そう。他にはどんな意見があったかしら？
次はメール送信状態の携帯電話を崖の上に投げ込む？
それも佐久間先輩が何度も試して失敗しているわね。他は？
テントのシートを材料にしてタコを作ってあげるとか、鳥を捕まえて足に手紙を結びつけるとか。
あら、何か思いついた？
タコに携帯電話を結びつけて空に上げるってどうかな？
そうね。試してみる価値はあると思うわ。
さっきの話し合いではそんなこと思いつかなかったのに。
あれもダメ、これもダメと否定するだけの話し合いに意味なんてないわ。 くだらない意見も全て受け入れた上で、その中から複数のアイデアを組み合わせて新しい意見を考える。そういう発想があれば、あの話し合いも無駄ではなかったはずなんだけどね。
どうしてあの場でそれを言わなかったの？
だってまた余計なことを言って怒られたら嫌じゃない。それに物の考え方の価値って人に教わるより自分で気がついた方がずっと高級だと思わない？
I don't deny that.
例えばタコに携帯電話を結びつけて飛ばすアイデアとか？
ええ、そう。そのひらめきが脳を活性化させるの。
やっぱりあなたは最初から答えが分かっていて、私に思いつかせるように会話で誘導したのね。
そういうものの捉え方は心外だわ。それともあなたは学校で数式を習っても同じように教師に噛みつくの？
Yeah, I'd assume that most teachers actually follow along those ideas, right? Or try to guide people along those way of thinking.
今の私たちと学校での私たちじゃ置かれている状況が違うわ。
But it doesn't matter, Mane. They still follow the same principles.
何でも教えてくれる人が身近にいると自分では考えることをしなくなる。そういう観点で見れば同じことよ。
Also true. The fact that you even have Kazuki trying to guide you into that way of thinking, you'd actually suppose... I personally be very appreciative of what Kazuki is doing.
私、あなたのそういう回りくどいところが少し苦手。
But then again, I guess it's our ego that's actually thinking that, damn, I'm falling into this girl's plans again.
気をつけるわ。
I felt like I was beginning to understand why my conversations with Kazuki sometimes felt slightly off. The discussions I had with this girl reminded me strongly of a classroom dialogue between a teacher and student. She never revealed the answers immediately, instead dropping vague, indirect hints. She clearly regarded those with no desire to learn as unworthy of her wisdom. In other words, very much like a veteran professor, an aging department head with a knowing smile. If Kazuki deigned to consider the matter seriously, might she be able to find a way out of this whole mess in the blink of an eye? The more I thought about it, the more these little lessons of Kazuki seemed like an indirect way of rubbing my nose in my inferiority. The implied message was, "You're incompetent." Frankly, it kind of pissed me off. And since I really was incompetent, I couldn't come up with any biting comebacks, which pissed me off even worse. I had an itching desire to show her up somehow, but what could I possibly hope to defeat her at? Ah, right. If nothing else, I'm probably a better cook. Yeah, there was a pretty good chance I could teach her a lesson or two in that arena. I latched onto that trifling point of superiority, imagining Kazuki fumbling around helplessly in the kitchen under my wise supervision. Geez, you're all thumbs, Kazuki, and all that. Before I knew it, there was a smile on my face. All of a sudden, this aggravating young woman looked like a cute little girl. I was slightly exasperated at my own simple-mindedness. I quickly put the culinary skills in question to use whipping up our meager breakfast. As Kazuki and I were choking it down, I ended up telling her about that little daydream.
その単純さこそが人が自殺をしないためのシステムよ。
I don't think she said suicide, but maybe she did, I'm not sure. She responded with these pretty much incomprehensible sentences, that and a gentle smile. What the heck is with this girl anyway? Well, whatever. I'd finished my breakfast. It hadn't exactly filled my stomach and inspired a burst of energy for the day to come. But I nonetheless decided to take a little positive action by proposing the kite cell phone idea to the captain.
あなたもなの？
どういう意味です？
そのアイデアを私のところに持ち込んだのはあなたが初めてではないという意味よ。10分ぐらい前に金田小森のペアが来て試させてほしいって言ってきたの。
そうなんですか。
Yeah, I guess anybody could come up with that one.
同じ実験を2つすることに意味はないし、他のアイデアを思いついたらまた来なさい。
わかりました。
I've been feeling a little proud of myself for coming up with a pretty decent idea. For some reason, it felt as though that achievement had been pulled out from under me. I trudged back to the tent, my shoulders drooping, and told Kazuki about the outcome. There was another pair that had hit on the exact same idea. Of course, Kaneda and Komori had participated in the same discussion, and had the same information to work from. It wasn't strange. It wasn't that strange a coincidence. Indeed, Kazuki showed no surprise whatsoever. Quite the opposite. She nodded her head with the words, "Ah, I figured as much." From what she told me, something called reminiscence was likely at work here.
レミニセンスというのはつまり情報を得た直後より一定の時間が経過してからの方が記憶の関連付けが進行する分早期や連結発想がしやすくなるという現象ね。
また難しい話をしようとしている？
I mean, it's not that complicated, but I do feel you on this one, Amane. Feels like Kazuki is just throwing a bunch of random crap at you for for no apparent reason.
そうね。専門的な話をすると長くなるし、やめておきましょう。
At least she noticed that.
ぜひそうしてください。
それで、何か他のアイデアは思いついた？
タコをあげて発見してもらうというのは他者の視覚に訴えかける通信、つまり光媒体の通信だよね。
ええ、そうね。
携帯電話を使うのはそのまま電波通信でしょ？
はあ、つまりそういうこと？
もしかして私が今から言おうとしたこともう分かっちゃった？
音による通信の可能性？
なんだ、やっぱりバレてた。
いいえ、私も今あなたの話で気がついたのよ。つまりバスのクラクションを鳴らすとか、そういった聴覚に訴えかける大音量装置による通信でしょ？
そうそう、そんな感じ。
I guess she hasn't really thought about what to do with the sound.
まさかとは思うけど、みんなで大きな声で叫ぶとか考えていたわけではないわよね。
それは
考えていたんだ。
はいはい、考えてましたよ。どうせ私はアホですよ。
発想の着眼点は悪くないわよ。誰かに先を越される前に部長に報告してみたら？
一応報告はするけど、きっと私でなくても誰かが思いつくアイデアよね。
言ったでしょ？そういった小さな発想の積み重ねが新しいアイデアにつながるのよ。
まあそれはわかるんだけどね。一つ思いついたらすぐに報告ってのもなんか頭悪いかなって。
だったらもう一つアイデアを用意したら？例えばそうね、あまり現実味はないけれど発想の一つとしてデジタル通信の可能性とかはどうかしら？
デジタル通信？
例えばそう、森に行ってこう長い木の枝を何本も集めてそれを縦に連結していけば理論上は何百メートルだろうと長い棒が作れるでしょ？
Are you crazy?
その長い棒の一端を私たちが掴んで右に回転させれば0、左に回転させれば1とすれば二進法のデジタル信号が送れるでしょ？
How long would that take though? Hundreds of meters? You're crazy. I mean, technically that's only 100 branches if one branch is 1 meter, but how long is usually a tree branch? Maybe like 20 centimeters?
なんか和樹にしては割とバカっぽいアイデアだよね、それ。
そうかしら。質量はともかく重量の制限を受けない宇宙空間でならタイムラグのない超長距離高速通信に応用できそうなネタだと思うけど、ダメ？
Is this her way of joking around?
ダメっていうか、宇宙ってなんだろうな。やっぱなんとかと天才って紙一重なんだね。今思い知った感じ。
だから発想の元というか、あくまでも着眼点の一つとして報告してみてはどうかしらというプロポーズなのだけれど。
まあそうね。 そういう考え方もあるって感じで報告してみるけど、バカだと思われたら嫌だな。
あなた、それは私に対して何気に失礼よ。
After that, I offered the captain my second idea and received a fairly positive evaluation of worth looking into. I did give a half-hearted mention of the possibility of digital communication as well, but as anticipated, the captain's reaction was unenthusiastic. The concept clearly didn't quite click with her either, and I was left with a vague permission for experiments within the range of common sense. Well, the proposed experiment just involved gathering long sticks and trying to bind them together, so at least failure wouldn't be a complete waste of effort. We'd have secured ourselves a supply of firewood if nothing else. That said, the first priority was looking into the more realistic possibility of communication through sound. In other words, examining the ruins of the bus and seeing if the horn was still functional. As a matter of fact, I had a bit of knowledge about motor vehicles. I'd liked cars ever since I was a young child. Back in the day, I loved tagging along with my dad to the market every morning in our mini truck. I guess my somewhat tomboyish, there we go, fascination with cars amused my dad, as he would often let me sit on his lap and take the wheel. Then let me drive around and around the market grounds for the sheer fun of it. Of course, I'd gotten a little old for that, but I never lost my curiosity about automobiles. I'd picked up a bit of knowledge about how they function. Crawling through the broken rear window, I made my way into the overturned bus once again. Inside, the smell of leaking fuel had grown noticeably thicker in the air. After slowly and carefully making my way the length of the bus, I reached the driver's seat to find a key still seated in the ignition. But the cylinder had been firmly turned to the off position. Come to think of it, that was my doing. When I dragged Mr. Ochi from the driver's seat, I found the eerie glow of the dashboard backlight so creepy that I immediately switched it off. Clutching the key tightly, I said a small prayer to no one in particular, then twisted it to on. The dashboard sprung immediately to life and I heard the distinctive stirring of the fuel pump motor. Apparently, the battery was still alive. Must have been a dry cell. With the vehicle sideways like this, the liquid electrolytes would have leaked out of a wet battery. I was tempted to keep turning the key to start, but the engine was probably a lost cause. I'd just be wasting precious battery juice in the attempt. First off, I was here to test whether the horn was operational. I gave the center of the steering wheel a light push with the palm of my hand, and a surprisingly loud blast of sound rang through the air.
よかった。まだ鳴る。
At the sudden sound, everyone in the valley turned as one to stare in my direction. For the moment, I'd confirmed the horn was operational. Now we had to consider how to make effective use of it. Just blasting away aimlessly would run down the battery quickly, so it seemed necessary to discuss how and when we should utilize it. Turning the ignition back to off for now, I cautiously made my way back out of the bus.
クラクション使えるみたいね。
そうだね。あとはどのタイミングで鳴らすかってのが問題かな。いくら鳴らしてもそれを聞きつけて救助を呼んでくれる人がそばにいなければまるで意味がないし。
Probably just honk it at a specified time, right? Maybe like 12 p.m. or something. I'd assume at least someone would be like driving past the area up top. At least I'd hope so.
まずは音という要素を一つ確保したというところで満足するべきね。それをそのまま使うのか、それとも他の何かと組み合わせて使うのか、その辺は今後考えていきましょう。
I turned around and looked up in the direction of the road. At a guess, it was perhaps 200 meters distant from the bottom of the ravine we were trapped in. The sound of our horn would probably carry that far. But how were we supposed to know someone was up there at any given moment? That was the biggest problem with this idea. From that distance, a car could be rumbling fairly noisily down the road and we likely wouldn't notice. I couldn't immediately think of anything other than the passive strategy of honking the horn at regular intervals in the hope of a coincidence.
捜索隊のヘリでも飛んできてくれれば分かりやすいんだけどな。
ヘリコプターだと逆に自分の出す音が大きすぎてこちらの出す音に気がつかないんじゃないかしら。
そうか。あ、 音がダメなら光はヘッドライトを取り外して空に向けて点灯してみたらどうかな。
いいアイデアだとは思うけど。
Turning back and following Kazuki's gaze, I quickly discovered why she trailed off mid-sentence. After tumbling down a slope 200 meters in length, finally plunging into a pit-like valley, the bus resembled a gigantic piece of gum chewed up and spat out by a dinosaur. The roof was caved in, the windows were all broken, and the headlights and turn signals were no exceptions to the general rule. Everyone was smashed beyond repair.
ダメか。
室内灯とかテールランプの一つも生き残っていれば何かの役に立つかもしれないし、調べてみましょう。
そうだね。
Kazuki and I divided the job of searching the wreckage of the bus for potentially useful items, but the noticeably important things had already been carried out. The only new discoveries were a few discarded magazines and a slightly dirty blanket that had been used as cushioning in the luggage compartment, as well as a small metal box containing a bare handful of tools, and a single fire extinguisher probably designed for use against vehicle fires. Nothing to write home about, in other words. I tried to go in without much in the way of expectations, but there was definitely a part of me clinging to the faint hope of discovering something. An armful of canned food and some unexplored nook of the luggage compartment would have sent me back to camp jumping for joy. When that hope was dashed, the disappointment hit me much harder than I had expected.
ねえカズキ、私たちどうなるのかな。
その質問、今日だけで4回目よ。そして私は毎回同じ答えを口にしている。
People can't help but voice these concerns, Kazuki.
なるようにしかならないし、なんとでもなるから今はただ希望を捨てずにできることをしなさい。だよね。分かってはいるんだけど、どうしてもね。
Of course you can. Just don't voice it, just think it in your head. You're kinda annoying, Kazuki, if you keep voicing those thoughts, Amane. For now, we simply do what we can. In those words, there was a slight glimmer of optimism. The suggestion that at some undefined later we would escape. But that vague hope was too slippery to cling onto. I couldn't see anything but overwhelming, unpredictable reality. The anxiety and uncertainty was almost too much to bear. It felt as though someone had suddenly dropped an enormous whale in front of me and told me to fillet it with a single fruit knife. Holding back tears, I was thrusting my tiny blade into thick, unyielding blubber, tormented by a sense of futility, doubtful I was accomplishing anything at all. Just waiting for someone to tell me it's impossible, just give up. In such a situation, I couldn't help but sink into pessimism and passivity. Is help coming? When will they arrive? What if they never find us? Can we possibly escape on our own? Can we possibly survive this? I knew full well that anguishing over such unanswerable questions accomplished nothing, but before I realized it, they were oozing out from the dark corners of my mind. Is this another one of those involuntary psychological defense mechanisms designed to push us through life? When I asked Kazuki, she shook her head and told me flat out, "No, that's probably just your personality." During the time we spent in the bus, Kaneda and Komori apparently completed their kite. Everyone left their personal projects behind for a while and gathered to watch the launch. The string they'd used was a slender fishing line taken from the tackle box. Its tensile strength was a point of concern, so it was decided to run an initial test flight without the cell phone attached. The length of the line was about 100 meters. Leaving aside the cell phone part of the plan, if we could get it up that high, someone might notice it from the road. But as it turned out, well, reality isn't quite that convenient. It was, after all, a kite made by a bunch of amateurs from rough visual memory. There wasn't any realistic chance it'd soar beautifully into the sky. After many failed launches, the makeshift kite ended up crushing into the ground and falling to pieces. To be perfectly honest, everyone gathered there had been more or less expecting as much from the very start, even the girls who constructed it. The failure didn't inspire any wailing or gnashing of teeth. Even if it had floated up perfectly, there was still the lid of trees hanging thickly over this valley. Weaving even a well-constructed kite up through the gaps in the canopy without tangling it hopelessly in the branches would clearly have been very difficult. I don't get it, like, I thought that the trees weren't going into the ravine that you guys fell off on. Wouldn't you guys be able to... I still have no, like, no good visualization of how the situation is or how the area is between... Like, I have no grasp on how the area is like right now. I thought that the ravine didn't have any trees on that side. Couldn't you just fly it there? Right? Why would you have to traverse or like try to fly it with the trees? That doesn't make sense to me. I don't get it. I don't know. Wouldn't it just make more sense to fly it below the ravine or the cliffs because there wasn't any trees, so you didn't have to do anything and just let it fly? But apparently the general feeling was that nothing more was going to come of this. Everyone left them alone with their mangled construction and headed back to their own stations. In the end, Kaneda and Komori never did succeed in getting the kite into the sky, and later that day, Mr. Ochi told me that it probably wouldn't have achieved much anyway. We were geographically quite close to the town Mr. Ochi had been born and raised in, and from what he said, the cell phone reception in the whole area was notoriously awful. What's more, take a look at a map, and there's a nicely paved national highway running straight through this region, but we'd fallen while driving down an old back road. Apparently, it was in frequent use when Mr. Ochi was a student here, but nowadays, almost no one takes it without some specific and compelling reason. He'd chosen it as a detour, concerned about traffic on the highway heading home. Japanese traffic? Are you serious? I don't know, Mr. Ochi. Unfortunately, the entrance to the road was narrow and inconspicuous, and because of the poor condition of the surface, it was sealed off every time heavy rain fell. As a result, the traffic was extremely light. In the first place, we wouldn't have plunged off the road if there had been a proper guardrail on that tight curve. Even if we got a cell phone well above the cliff, there's a good chance it wouldn't pick up a signal. I thought we should probably pass on this information to Kaneda and Komori, who were even then absorbed in repairing their almost certainly useless kite. When I suggested as much, however, Kazuki frowned and told me, let it be. Rather than wasting effort on a losing bet, wouldn't it be more effective to have them trying out something else? In response to that question, Kazuki smirked slightly, cocked her head slightly to the side, and asked me if I was willing to hear out a bit of complicated stuff. That lightly mocking body language of hers was getting on my nerves, but I agreed to listen. After stressing my request for the clear and concise version, of course.
私たちがここに来てまだ2日目よ。今はまだ拡散期です。つまり、今は多くの無駄を重ねて加減を学ぶ時期なの。放っておいても、そのうち勝手に学んで無駄をしなくなるわよ。
To summarize, we were newborn infants relative to this environment. We needed to be allowed to wail, wriggle around aimlessly, and pop things into our mouths. Otherwise, our maturation process would be crippled. Apparently. I sort of understood what Kazuki was getting at, but when I thought about how those two would feel when they discovered their hard work had been in vain, I couldn't help wanting to let them know. Turning my back on Kazuki, I walked over to Kaneda-senpai. She was perched on a moderately sized rock, her brow furrowed with earnest concentration as she tried to untangle a complex clump of fishing line.
あ？まあ知ってたよ。
Kaneda received my hesitant advice with unexpected composure.
佐久間先輩からそんな話は聞いてたしね。
佐久間先輩から？
I turned around to face the person in question, still tirelessly flinging her battered cell phone high into the air a few meters away.
どういうことです？
ああ、 実は上の道路にいた時から県外だってのは分かってたんだ。
Slightly before the bus plunged off the cliff, Sakuma had casually opened her cell phone to check the time, and noticed the words no signal in the corner of the screen. She even remembered worrying idly about how we would call the police if we got in an accident out here.
じゃあ電波が入らないことを知っていて、それでも携帯を投げ続けていたってことですか？
まあそうなるかな。でも絶対に入らないと決まったわけじゃないし、たまたま私の携帯が県外だっただけで、他の携帯、他のキャリアなら入るかもしれないだろ。
That's my first thought too. Just because her cell phone didn't have any reception doesn't mean that the other cell phone might not have reception. For that reason, she decided to try borrowing Ibuki's phone, a different model on a different network, and tossing it instead. But Ibuki said if anyone was going to throw her cell phone around, it was going to be her. In the end, the two of them ended up out here, tossing and picking up their phones together.
結局のところ、伊吹の携帯でもダメっぽいんだけど、ほら、私はこんな性格だからさ。無駄だって頭じゃ分かっていても、体を動かしてないと落ち着かないんだ。そういう性分なんだよ。
I would say that... Nah, I don't think that's how I roll. I like moving my body, but if I know it's a waste of time, I probably wouldn't do it. Thinking back, Sakuma had approached basketball with a similar mindset. No matter how overwhelming our opponent in the next match, she would practice diligently, even knowing we would lose. Even when she was the only one left in the gym, she'd keep right on going.
バスケの試合にしたってそうだけど、やれることはあったのにっていう後悔が一番悔しいと私は思うんだ。
I'd agree with you.
どうせ負けるにしろ、やるだけのことをやった上での敗北なら、勝利はなくても満足は得られるし、その次につながるだろ。
That's actually a very nice way of looking at it, Sakuma. Words very typical of Sakuma, well known in our team for her silent dedication. She stood out for her skill, but had apparently removed herself from consideration for the captaincy, preferring to avoid placing herself above others. However, there was one person whose mood took a rapid, obvious turn for the sour at this little speech. Her roommate in the dorm and partner in the valley, Ibuki.
私はクマ先輩のそういう無駄に暑苦しいところとか苦手です。それに電波が入らないって話、私は聞いてませんよ。
Ibuki had been drafted into this exercise in futility without her knowledge. Judging from the way she was biting her lower lip and squeezing her cell phone tightly in her hands, she wasn't happy about it. The girl had a tendency to complain fairly easily, a trait that often left her somewhat isolated from the group in both the classroom and on the team.
あれ？言ってなかったっけ？
そういう大雑把で忘れっぽいところも嫌いです。
悪かったよ、ブッキー。
With those words, Sakuma casually slipped her hand around Ibuki's waist, drew the younger girl close, and rested her chin on top of Ibuki's head.
ブッキーって呼ばないでください。
Pouting, Ibuki mumbled that even her classmates had started to pick up that stupid nickname. Apparently, even seemingly mismatched individuals could develop some fairly intimate bonds, given enough time together. Staring at the two of them, I entertained some idle speculation about which one would be wearing the pants, not even noticing my cheeks growing hot. Really, Amane? I mean, I guess it could happen. The suspension bridge effect, right? Apparently, my trivial delusions were showing pretty clearly on my face, as Sakuma gave me a broad, almost boastful grin.
だから言っただろ。君たちが思っているほど私たちは仲が悪いわけじゃないってさ。君の相方はどうした？あの風見って子は放っておくとへそを曲げてすね始めるタイプだと思うよ。
まさかあの和樹ですよ。
Kazami Kazuki didn't need anyone's attention. To her, I was nothing but a personal chef, a convenient servant girl, an occasional object of amusement. And if Kazuki really needed to, I was pretty sure she could pick up cooking quickly enough. Give her a while and she'd probably be good enough to leave me very nearly worthless.
わかっちゃいないね。 全然だよ、スオアマネ。だったら君はどうしてあの風見和樹とのペアを選んだんだい？
それは
Pick her? I didn't really have a choice in the matter. As for why things turned out that way, it was probably because we both realized I was the only person in the team capable of putting up with that fiercely unique personality of hers.
じゃあさ、風見に同じ質問をされたとき、こう答えてみればいいよ。
As Sakuma leaned over to whisper in my ear, I caught a strong whiff of the refreshing, citrusy scent of her body. The way her breath tickled my ear as she spoke didn't help either. I froze stiff as a statue, unable to really focus on processing the meaning of her words.
それでバッチリ。風見が君のことをどう思っているかはっきりとわかると思うよ。でも強い言葉だからあまり頻発しない方がいいと思うな。それが私からのアドバイス。
I think every word that we speak kinda loses its power if we do it like multiple times. Just like when people say they love you. Like, not every single time you say you love someone, it's gonna make them like, you know, weep in joy or be happy. Sometimes, depending on your attitude too, it might actually lose its effectiveness.
はあ、さようで。
I didn't really get it, to be honest. It felt like the most likely outcome would be Kazuki laughing in my face. Then again, it probably couldn't really hurt to give it a shot sometime, if I happen to remember.
ほら、お姫様がへそを曲げる前に戻りなよ。
お姫様ね。
Not that I found Sakuma's theory particularly convincing, but I did decide to head back in search of Kazuki. However, her shoes weren't in front of our tent. I took a quick look inside anyway, but there was no sign of her. What's this? Where'd she get to now? Well, Sakuma may not have been too far off the mark. Leaving Kazuki unattended for too long didn't seem to be the best idea, considering this habit of casually strolling off without a word. Don't tell me she's wandered off into the forest again. Maybe she was actually doing this on purpose, waiting for me to come along looking for her. No, I was definitely reading too much into this now. That said, there was no reason to think Kazuki was coming back anytime soon. And considering that blunt personality of hers, the longer I've left her to her own devices, the more likely she'd end up quarreling and causing us trouble. After heaving a little sigh and mumbling a few complaints about my nuisance of a partner, I ended up trotting off in search of her like the hopeless soft touch I was. As it turned out though, my search wasn't a particularly arduous one. Kazuki's whereabouts came to light within 2 minutes. I discovered her shoes lying neatly side by side in front of the largest structure in our camp, the conspicuous 6-person tent.
和樹いるの？
When dealing with a tent, knocking isn't exactly an option, so I hesitantly called out to her through the door.
いるわ。入っていらっしゃいな。
As instructed, I removed my shoes and crawled into the tent. The interior was dimly lit, muggy, and filled with the overpowering stench of disinfectant and sweat. I let out a small, reflexive groan of dismay.
どうだった？電波の話。金田さんたちに伝えた？
Even as Kazuki spoke, she was applying disinfectant to Sakurai's wounded stomach. Maybe the gloomy lighting had something to do with it, but the gash across Sakurai's abdomen and the rough fishing line stitches holding it shut seemed all the more gruesome today, to the point I could barely stand to look at it.
悪いけど、手すきのようなら広岡さんの額のタオルを変えてあげてもらえる？
わかった。
I turned to the other side of the tent as requested. Hiroka-san was lying nearby with a damp towel on her forehead, repeating long, deep breaths. Her eyes were squeezed tightly shut. It was obvious at a glance that she was still suffering from the fever brought on by breaking both her legs. The howls and moans which had continued throughout the night had gone quiet that morning, so I'd assume her condition had improved. But it was clear to me now that she'd simply lost the physical strength to scream.
広岡さん、大丈夫？
Anyone with a set of functional eyes could tell in a second that she wasn't remotely alright, but I couldn't find anything else to say. When I took the towel from her forehead, it was burning with such heat that it could have been resting on a hot iron plate. She was drawing regular, repeated breath, but there was no response whatsoever to my question. Although she seemed to be awake, she didn't seem fully conscious of her surroundings. Seeking the hot towel in a plastic bag, soaking, filled with cold water, I gave it a very light squeeze, then replaced it on Hiroko-san's forehead. Oh, this is Hiroka. I thought Hiroka was the girl with the bluish hair like Kazuki.
私じゃないわ。今あなたを見ているのはスオアマネよ。
ありがとう、スオさん。
そう、意識をしっかりね。呼吸のタイミングを忘れないように。
ごめんね。
いいのよ。
Kazuki kept at her conversation with Hiroka-san without even turning around. In that moment, watching the silhouette of her back in that dim tent was strangely reassuring to me. There was something strong, almost dignified about her just then, as though she were some famous physician utterly confident in her role. Having completed her disinfection of Sakurai's wound, Kazuki began to quickly wind the bandages back into place, speaking in an ice-cold voice as she worked.
桜井さん、包帯で蒸し暑い上に縫った傷がかゆいのはわかりますが、かきむしらないでください。
Yeah, I thought this girl was actually Hiroka-san, but I guess not. What is her? Oh, is this the girl with the like stomach? I guess so.
かゆみというのは軽微な痛みのことです。かゆいということは治癒が進んでいる証拠なのですから、どんなにかゆくても我慢してください。
はい、ごめんなさい。
どうしても我慢できないときは呼んでください。その時はまた消毒します。
Yeah, I'm guessing this is the girl with the wounded stomach.
わかりました。ありがとう。
また後で様子を見に来ます。
With those words, Kazuki crawled out of the tent, signaling for me to follow with a glance.
包帯を洗いに行こうと思うのだけれど、私はうまく手が使えないから、あなた付き合ってもらえる？
それは構わないけど。
じゃあ行きましょう。
I caught a quick glimpse of long strips of cloth blackened with blood in Kazuki's hands, presumably Sakurai-san's old bandages. But in the next moment, she turned her back on me and abruptly began to walk off. What was this? She seemed to be in something of a bad mood. Unfortunately, it was a little difficult to tell for sure in Kazuki's case, as she was more than a bit brusque at the best of times.
広岡さんと桜井さんの状態はどうなのか。それが聞きたいんじゃなくて？できれば彼女たちには聞かれたくないの。移動しながら話しましょう。
分かった。
Well, that explained the sudden exit. Kazuki's estimate of the medical situation wasn't as pessimistic as I had feared. Sakurai's abdominal laceration was apparently healing relatively steadily. The larger problem was Hiroka-san and her fractured legs. Although Kazuki had strained her legs, pulled the bones into place, and fixed them with makeshift splints, the blazing fever that accompanied the injuries showed no signs of receding. Hiroka-san wasn't exactly what you could call robust or sturdy to begin with. At present, she had weakened to the point that her body was incapable of accepting the nourishment it needed to heal. They tried to feed her a light soup, even crushing the small chunks of potato with a spoon to make them easier to swallow. But after swallowing a mere 3 mouthfuls, she insisted she was completely full. And continuing to feed her regardless only resulted in her vomiting back the entire meal.
それでも安静にしていれば少しずつ回復に向かうとは思うけれど、難しいわね。
I think that's a very naive way of looking at it, Kazuki.
時間がかかるってこと？
それもあるけれど、薬が絶対的に足りないわ。
Our only source of medical supplies was a single first aid kit we kept on hand to treat scrapes during practice. Although we were well stocked in band-aids, disinfectant, and pain-relieving patches, we lacked antibiotics to prevent lacerations from festering, and drugs to bring down the agonizing inflammation caused by bone fractures.
彼女たちは自分たちが集団の中で負担になっていることを気にしているわ。わざとらしく優しく接すると彼女たちの自責に拍車をかけかねないから、できるだけ自然に接してあげた方がいいわ。
And that would explain why she seemed oddly impassive back there, I guess. Well, I had to admit, it would probably be exceptionally creepy to have Azaikyousuke of all people treating you with tender compassion.
それで、あなたの方はどうだったの？携帯電話の電波が入らない可能性があることを金田、小森のペアに伝えに行ったのでしょ？
彼女たちそのことを知っていたみたい。
そう。
無駄かもしれないと分かっていても、他に何もすることがないし、可能性もゼロじゃないからって。それと佐久間先輩からの新情報だけど、上の道路でも携帯は圏外だったみたい。先生も先輩もなんでもっと早く言ってくれなかったのかな。
電波の入りが悪かったのは先生が学生の頃の話だから、今は改善されている可能性もあるという希望を残しておきたかったのかもしれないわね。
Or he just want to leave the students to their own devices in hopes that it might at least distract them somewhat.
それにこんな状況でしょ。先生としてもなるべくネガティブな意見は口にしたくなかったんじゃないかしら。
気持ちはわかるけど、そういう情報って早めに出し合った方がいいと思うな。それに変にペアなんか組まずにみんなで一丸になって情報を出し合ったり、仕事を分散した方が効率がいいと思うけど。
This whole idea of dividing ourselves into pairs that would operate independently had been Kazuki's suggestion. It's true that the difficulty of keeping everyone supervised was dramatically reduced under this system, since everyone would naturally be keeping an eye on their partner. But that was pretty much the only benefit I could see. Everyone cooperating seemed more likely to produce good ideas, and it felt like operating in one large group would reduce the weight any given individual was carrying on their shoulders.
それがそうでもないのよね。意見の数が増えるだけではまとまりに欠けるし、負担が減りすぎる個体が出てくるのもまた問題なのよ。
どういうこと？負担が減りすぎる？
あまね、あなた働きありの法則って知ってる？
I don't think I'm familiar with that, but I know for a fact that if people actually don't have enough burden, they would leech off other people, for sure.
知らない。何それ？あり？
話すと長いから選択しながら説明しましょう。
Apparently, Kazuki had pushed this to adopt this pair system, with all its seeming drawbacks, in an attempt to avoid a specific organizational problem known as the worker ant principle. It was obvious she was fully prepared to give me another headache-inducing lecture, so I asked her to give me the short version, which went something like this. Within any relatively organized group, the appearance of individuals who toil diligently at their job tend to be counteracted by others beginning to neglect their work. For example, in ant society, inside a colony, an organization operating under the leadership of a queen ant, there are apparently not only the familiar worker ants, but also a sizable population of slacker ants that spend most of their time wandering around aimlessly. If you pick out all the hard-working ants who take their duties seriously and place them in a brand new colony, a fairly consistent percentage will lose their previous enthusiasm and transform into slackers. And back in the old nest, where all the hard workers have suddenly vanished, a good chunk of the slacker ants will soon begin throwing themselves vigorously into their work. It's apparently a well-observed phenomenon. This principle isn't limited to ants alone, it applies to human societies as well. This natural tendency to lean heavily on the overachievers makes efficiently managing an organization in the long term much more difficult than one might imagine. By dividing us into pairs, the colony was decentralized. Everyone was essentially forced to help their partner, making it harder to coast along as a slacker. On top of which, it would be possible to encourage competition between the small groups, producing a meteoric rise in net productivity per capita or something. I mean, sure, But that's not really realistic in a situation like this, to be honest. I did more or less understand what she was trying to say, but to be perfectly honest, I couldn't shake the feeling she was just definitely pulling the wool over my eyes. In this situation, I would say so, yes, Amane.
つまりちゃんとした意味があってペア制度を採用しているってこと？
She probably just didn't want to deal with the group all that much and preferred to work alongside you so that she can do something else on the side.
そういうこと。今はそのメリットをあまり感じ取れないかもしれないけれど、そうね。例えば集団の中で喧嘩が発生した時とか、その意味が見えてくると思うわ。
よくわからないけど、和樹がそういうのならそうなんでしょうね。
なんだかそれ、あまり好きではない言いようだわ。言いたいことや不満があれば遠慮なく言いなさいと言ったでしょ。
ごめん、別に不満とか思ってないし、ただ和樹の言うことなら間違いないかなって、そういう意味で言っただけだよ。
あなたは私の奴隷ではなくお友達でしょ。それともそんな風に思っているのは私だけ？もしそうならそれはあまりにも悲しいわ。
You know, even in this situation with the colony being split into two like this and with it being decentralized, I feel like Amane is leaning a bit too much to you too now, Kazuki.
怒らないでよ。別に皮肉を言ったつもりもないんだし。
Not to say that she's being a slacker aunt, but in terms of logically thinking, she might be not thinking as much and just try to go along with you, I feel.
もしあなたが私とのペアに不満があるのなら、他のことを変わってくれても構わないのよ。
その言い草こそ傷つくな。あなたこそ別に私じゃなくても便利な女なら誰でもいいのね。
そうは言っていないでしょ。
そう聞こえたもの。あなたこそ私とのペアに不満を。
All of a sudden, the word Sakuma had whispered into my ear popped vividly into my mind.
何？あって。だいたいあなた、どうして私とのペアなんて受け入れたの？
それはね、和樹のことが一番好きだからだよ。はい。だからこのメンバーの中で私は和樹のことが一番好きだからあなたとペアを組んだの。
そう。
I guess she's not really well accustomed to people liking her.
和樹は私のこと好き？
If I was Kazuki, though, I probably would have known that Amane was most likely lying at this point.
包帯を洗わなきゃ。
I mean, like I said, I think Kazuki is a bit too naive, even though she is smart.
和樹？
Huh? What? Was this really happening? Kazami Kazuki flustered with embarrassment? Amazing, Sakuma-senpai. It really worked. I'll give a testimonial for your infomercial.
ねえ和樹、私のこと好きなんでしょ？それも大好きなのね。
うるさい。私は今忙しいのよ。くだらないことを話している暇があったら手伝ってほしいのだけれど。
Damn you, tsunderes.
ごまかした。図星なのね。
図星とかそういう、どうしてそんな言い方をするの？言わなくてもわかることでしょ。
和樹。
She was so ridiculously adorable that I just couldn't help myself. Sneaking up behind Kazuki, I gently rested my hands on her shoulders, then leaned forward and nuzzled my nose against the back of her head. With a hysterical little shriek that could only be described as alarmingly out of character, Kazami Kazuki jerked forward, lost her balance, and pitched face first into the marshy stream.
和樹ごめん、大丈夫？
Yeah, this is just characterization so that she isn't always shown as like the girl genius, I assume. That's like emotionless and all that. I mean, To me, it doesn't really affect anything, but I could see people saying Kazuki is like adorable, just like what Amane is thinking right now. But it doesn't really affect me personally. Like, I don't consider this sort of thing precious or adorable. Man, I'm just way too jaded, I swear.
あなた、自分には同性愛の趣味はないって言ってなかったかしら？
いや、ないけどさ。でも今はそれも悪くないかなってちょっと思ってる。そう、あなたとなら。
うかつだったわ。いい？あなたが今感じているその感情は吊り橋効果で説明ができます。落ち着いて、もう一度自分の中の感情を整理してみましょ
服濡れちゃったね。脱がしてあげる。
Man, you're a slut, Amane. Even back then, you're a slut. Damn you!
う。いや、落ち着いて、そこを動かないで。それ以上近づいたら悲鳴をあげるわよ。
ごめん、冗談だってば。
冗談。
だから私にそっちの趣味なんて本当にないから安心して。ほら、いつまでも冷たい水の中に座ってると風邪ひいちゃうよ。ほら、手を出して。
Ignoring Kazuki's bitter scowl, I offered her my hand, which she accepted with a great show of reluctance.
ひどい目にあったわ。
だからごめんって、冗談が過ぎたよ。
あなたの冗談は笑えないわ。
おお、和樹の口からそんなセリフが聞ける日が来るとは長生きはするもんだよね。
言ってなさい。私をいじめると夜中にお化けが来るんだから。
やめてよ、夜おトイレに行けなくなっちゃうじゃない。
そもそもここにはトイレなんてないわよ。
機嫌直してよね。さっきのは確かに冗談だけど、私が和樹のことを好きだっていうのは本当だから。
どうせ誰か悪い先輩にでもそう言えって入れ知恵されたのでしょ。いいからさっさと洗濯を済ませてしまいましょう。
もうそういうこと言う子は可愛くないぞ、和樹。
生まれてこの方可愛いなんて母親にも言われたことなんてないわ。
Don't think my mom ever said that word to me too.
ちょっと和樹、制服は脱がないでいいの？
大丈夫よ。夏だしすぐに乾くわ。
胸が小さくても笑ったりしないよ。
どうしてあなたはそういうことを平気で言うの？なんだかあなた最初の頃とずいぶんキャラクターが変わってきていない？
Nah, it's the same, Kazuki. You're just, humoring her. That's why she keeps doing it.
もともと私はこういうキャラだし、あなたという存在に慣れてきたってことじゃないかな。
Less comfortable and more like you're enjoying her response, Amane.
そうやって私をおもちゃにしてればいいのよ。いつか罰が当たるんだから。って、
何、どうしたの？
I don't know, I heard something.
犬が。
犬？
I looked down to find a toy breed dog. Toy breed? At Kazuki's feet, rubbing its face up against her legs and snuffling in evident curiosity.
これって小森さんの飼っている犬？
そうみたいね。
Who's Komori again?
何？和樹って犬が苦手なの？
そうじゃないけど、急に茂みの中から飛び出してきたからびっくりしたわ。
I was gonna say, the fact that a dog came here out of nowhere means that at least civilization is close, but I guess not if this is an actual dog that we brought along. But don't you find it weird that we brought along a dog in a freaking camping trip for basketball?
飼い主は？小森さんはいないの？この子一人でここまで来たのかな？
And the fact that we never even talked about this when the bus first crashed. Like, we didn't see any dog. This feels a bit out of nowhere.
そうみたいね。喉が渇いているみたいだから水の匂いをたどってここまで来たのかもしれない。
そっか。じゃあちょっと待ってて。今お水汲んであげる。
やめた方がいいわ。
どうして？
この手の品種改良が施された小型犬は内臓が弱いことがあるし、飼い主の許可なく生水はあげない方がいいわよ。
あ、そうなんだ。でも私、昨日からここのお水ガブガブ飲んでるけど全然平気だよ。
あなたは見るからに健康だし、生水ぐらい全然平気だと思うけれど、この子は見るからに繊細そうだから、一度煮沸してから飲ませた方がいいんじゃないかしら。
I think everyone should boil the water first.
その言葉、何気に傷つくぞ。
キャンプに戻れば煮沸済みのお水があるから、それをあげましょう。我慢できる？
Then again, the water in Japan should still be fairly clear, unlike in other places. Especially here in Indonesia where everything is just God. It's so awful. So much trash everywhere. Although it almost certainly didn't have the first clue what Kazuki's words meant, the little dog responded with a high-pitched bark and began wagging its tail happily.
そう、いい子ね。
嘘、和樹って犬と会話するキャラ？
あのね、私だって一応そういう女の子らしい一面だってあるわよ。
まあ、わかるような気もする。
Kazuki did seem likely to turn into one of those hardworking career women. The hard-ass middle manager in pantsuit, who ends up blazing right past marriageable age without sparing the time for men. And this was exactly the sort of dog she'd been keeping in her apartment to help distract from the loneliness of her existence. Working like a maniac during the day, chewing out her male underlings at every opportunity, earning the intimidating awe of the other women, getting herself the ignominious title Tyrant Queen of the Office. Then rushing home to her apartment at night, greeting the fluffy ball of fur, waiting at the front door with a sugary "mommy's home poopsie" or something. You have an overactive imagination, Amane. Then proceeding to pamper it with gourmet meals, maybe even dressing it up in little sweaters, keeping up a simpering stream of baby talk all the while.
今私、あなたのリアルな未来を少しだけ想像して、ちょっと涙が出そうになったわ。
そう、一体どんな未来を想像したのか詳しく聞いてみたい気もするけれど、聞かない方が心の健康には良さそうね。
I like how you're squinting your eyes, Kazuki.
とりあえず包帯も洗い終わったし、戻りましょうか。この子も飼い主のところに連れて行かないといけないし。
With those words, Kazuki bent down and scooped up the dog, playing at her feet into her arms.
あ、和樹、片手じゃ大変でしょ？ワンちゃん私が預かるよ。
そう？じゃあお願い。
あれ？なんか嫌がってる？ほらワンちゃん、こっちおいで。どうしたの？
あまね、あなた犬に嫌われるタイプ？
おかしいな。そんなことないと思うんだけど。っていうか、逆に和樹はどうしてそんなにその子に懐かれてるの？前からお友達？
いいえ、小森さんが犬を飼っているのは知っていたけど、見たのは初めてだし、名前だって知らないわ。
Komori's love for dogs was well known among the team members, and I'd heard about her puppy, but this was my first time seeing it as well. Komori had been so anxious and lonely at the prospect of being separated from her dog during the sleepaway training camp that she ended up smuggling it in with her. At the planning meeting before the trip, she timidly tried asking the captain for official permission to take her pet along as a companion, but naturally the answer was a curt "school trips are not your personal vacation." But Komori simply couldn't bring herself to leave the puppy behind. In the end, she decided to hide the animal in her sports bag, then apologized once we arrived at the campground and a deal was done.
この犬、なんて種類だっけ？マルチーズ？
シーズーでしょ？あなた、小型犬は何でもマルチーズに見えるの？
I have no idea about breeds of dogs. Sorry, guys.
だって小型犬なんてマルチーズかチワワぐらいしか知らないもの。あとトイプードル？
どうでもいいからこの子を受け取ってよ。結構重いわ。
いや、分かってるんだけどね。
When I reached out toward it, the tiny dog bared its fangs and gave a sharp bark of warning.
なんか むっちゃ嫌われてるんですけど、なんで？
Maybe it's because you smell Amane.
何か悪いことでもしたの？この子の餌を盗み食いしたとか。
和樹、あんたもしかして私を食いしん坊キャラにしようとしているの？
If anything, dogs tended to like me, and I didn't remember mistreating this animal in the 5 minutes I'd known it. It almost felt like, rather than having a problem with me in particular, the dog just didn't want to be carried by anyone other than Kazuki.
もしかしてこの子、和樹のことを群れのボスだと思ってるんじゃない？
はい？ああ、犬は飼われている家の中でボスを決めるっていうあれのこと？
うん、そう。多分だけど、この子は群れのボスを本能で嗅ぎ分けてるんじゃないかな。
Are you serious?
それがどうして私なの？私より偉そうな人間なんて他にもいるでしょうに。
それ素で言ってるから和樹ってすごいよね。
何が？
The dogs seem to have recognized Kazuki as the alpha of the pack. Not the captain, not our teacher. Titles don't mean much to an animal, but they're sensitive to confidence, pride, and bossiness. And to be honest, I don't think there were many people who could compete with Kazuki on any of those fronts.
とにかくこの犬は私が連れて行けばいいのね。まったく飼い主は何をしているのかしら。
In the next moment, as if to answer Kazuki's mild mutters of complaint, we heard the panicked voice of the girl in question.
あの声、小森さんの声だよね。もしかしてあーくんってこのチワワのこと？
だからシーズーだってば。
小森さん、こっちにいるよ。
うるさ、急に大きな声を出さないでよ。
あ、ごめん。なんか和樹ってさ、大きな音って嫌いだよね。
私はあなたと違って体も小さいし繊細なのよ。
あのさ、その私が大雑把で無神経な女って設定やめてもらっていいかな。
Oh, this girl's Komori, okay.
アリオンならここにいるわよ。
The instant Kazuki lowered the dog to the ground, it trotted over to Komori-san and jumped into her waiting arms.
よかった。急に姿が見えなくなったから心配しちゃった。
ねえ、アリオンって？
その犬の名前よ。
なんで名前知ってるの？さっきは知らないって言ってなかった？そうか、あーくんって呼び名から名前を推理したとか？
I think she just guessed Amane.
首輪よ。さっき見たら首輪のプレートにアリオンって書いてあったから。
あ、そうなんだ。なんだ。
あのね、いくら私でもあーくんからアリオンを推理するのは無理だと思うわよ。あまり私を超人だと思わないでね。
It's easier for her to think that way, Kazuki.
なんか和樹の場合、その人の好きな数字を聞いただけでその人の人生を10年先まで言い当てそうな気もするのよね。
I mean, you could probably predict someone's future in 10 years, but you'd need to know more than just their favorite number.
あなた、私のことを妖怪か何かと勘違いしてない？
Soothsaying witch? She said yokai though. It's like a Japanese demon.
いや、さすがの私もそこまでは言ってないけどさ。
That said, if someone were to tell me they'd seen her brewing potions in a cauldron by moonlight, I don't think I would have dismissed the story out of hand.
見つけてくれてありがとう。ちょっと目を離している隙にいなくなってしまって、ずっと探していたの。
その子、喉が渇いているみたいだけど、あなた、ちゃんとお水あげてる？
Damn, her demeanor reminds me a lot of this girl called Zakuro in Subahibi, and I don't like that.
でもこの子お腹が弱いから専用のお水しか飲めないし、
この子のために持ってきたお水ももう残りが少なくて。もしかしてこの子にそこのお水飲ませちゃった？
いいえ、飼い主の許可もなく勝手に生水を飲ませない方がいいと思ったから飲ませなかったわ。
よかった。ありがとう。気を使ってくれて。
いいのよ、私も犬は好きだし。可愛い子ね。男の子？
そうなの。この子のお母さんっていうのが去年のドッグショーで国内2位になったダイアナで、お父さんが
Crap. This seems like it's going to last a while. For the disinterested layperson, listening to the prideful boasts of a dog fancier is sheer agony. Nah. It's anything really, Amane, not just prideful boasts of a dog fancier. Any information or any type of talks to me, if I'm disinterested in the topic, I'm like, yeah, I might zone out like Yuji did when he was talking to Sachi about that stupid shark pouch. Well then, how can I make my escape? Maybe I should just counterpunch and start lecturing these two about the relative merits of the TE-27 and 510 Bluebird. But as I was idly pondering these matters, from the sky above the quiet forest, usually silent but for the cries of birds and the whispering of branches, there came a soft but distinctive sound of propeller blades tearing through air.
この音ってヘリだよ。ヘリコプターの音だ。戻ってみんなに知らせなきゃ。急ごう。
We broke into a desperate run, craning our necks to watch the sky through cracks in the trees. The sound of the helicopter's rotor blades grew louder by the second. Soon, even the howling of its turboshaft engine was perceptible through the din. Knowing that it was coming closer by the moment, we couldn't help but shout pointlessly for their attention. When we reached the camp, everyone had already gathered underneath an opening in a canopy. Waving their arms furiously, they shouted to the sky, "Hey, down here!" Our voices were powerless, but still, we rubbed our throats raw. "Use the fucking horn of the car, you fools!" Or the bus. Some of the group was frantically gathering whatever wood and grass they could, using old magazines from the bus as kindling in an attempt to produce smoke. Others were panicking or picking up baseball-sized stones from the ground and throwing them into the sky with all their might, even knowing it was futile. This isn't enough. We need something to really announce our presence. I sprinted to the bottom of the ravine, my legs burning with exertion. Crawling into our overturned bus, I stumbled frantically down its length to the driver's seat. At my first violent twist, the key caught stubbornly in the ignition and refused to turn. After a few fumbling moments, I pulled the key all the way out, then jammed it firmly back in. After what seemed like an eternity, the cylinder finally moved to on. Please notice! I pressed down on the horn button at the center of the steering wheel with all the strength I could muster. A grating electronic sound echoed in the air, shaking my eardrums. But all too quickly, the powerful blast of the horn ate away at what little charge was left in the battery. The volume decreased with every passing second. And as the helicopter slowly passed overhead, the droning of its blades all but erased every other sound in the valley. Soon enough, that noise diminished into the distance and was gone. We did what we could. We tried everything. But there was no way to know if it had been enough. What about the kite?
ねえ、どうだった？こっちに気がついた？そんなのわかんないよ。でも右に向かって飛んでいたのに、こちらに向かって進路を変えましたよね。それってこちらの存在に気がついたってことじゃないんですか？だったらなぜ飛び去ったのよ。気がついたのなら戻ってくるか、この上を旋回したりするんじゃないの？
あれは私たちを探しに来たヘリじゃなくて、どこか民間のヘリなのかもしれません。こちらに気がついたのなら無線とかで連絡を取っているかもしれないじゃないですか。そうですよ。それに燃料が残り少なくて一旦戻っただけかもしれません。またすぐに戻ってくるんですよ。きっとそうです。
Gotta be nice to be that optimistic. Or maybe they could only try to feel optimistic at this point. In that moment, we were all united in a surge of hope. It wasn't just the prospect of immediate salvation. We had spent nearly 2 full days in this place, an isolated island devoid of any hint of human presence. It was beginning to feel as though the rest of the human race might just have vanished from the earth in the instant we plunged off that cliff. And then that helicopter passed by. Even if they didn't notice us this time, typo, another chance would come. We weren't stranded on some uncharted island. We were within eyeshot of a road that connected to the normal world, where our normal lives were waiting for us. Another chance would definitely come, which is why I think that it's so dumb that they didn't try to travel the jungle in the first place. Like, how big could the jungle be for... I don't know, though. Everyone believed that, unquestioningly. We watched the sky until it grew dark. Evening arrived with surprising swiftness. In the end, the helicopter did not return that day.
ねえカズキ、あのヘリって何だったのかな。
さあ、あまり詳しくはないけれど、タンデムローター機だったみたいだし、CH47 とかいうやつじゃないかしら。
いや、機種が知りたいわけじゃなくってさ。
ああ、つまり私たちの救助に来たヘリなのか、それとも偶然通りかかった民間のヘリなのか、それが気になるのね。
まあそういうことになるのかな。
おそらく後者でしょうね。あの手のヘリを所有運用しているのは米軍か自衛隊か。どちらにせよ私たちを探しに来たヘリではなく、偶然通りかかっただけだと思うわ。
やっぱりそうなんだ。
落ち込むことはないわ。またいずれこの上を通ることもあるでしょうし、その時は今度こそ無視できないようにすればいいのよ。
具体的にはどうするの？
そうね。今日あのヘリが来た時、佐久間さんがヘリに向かって石を投げていたでしょ？
全然届かなかったけどね。
だから次の機会までに森で木を切り倒して投石機を作りましょう。どうせなら人が投げられないぐらい大きい岩を飛ばしてぶつけてやれば嫌でも気がつくんじゃないかしら。
そんなのもし本当に当たったら墜落しちゃうんじゃん。
I mean, she got the right idea, though. Maybe try to make yourself a slingshot or something like that.
好都合じゃない。撃墜すれば墜落機を捜索するために何機もヘリが来るわ。全部落としてやりましょう。
I think this is her idea of a joke again. Man, you have a weird sense of humor, Kazuki.
いや、だから落としてどうするのよ。助けてもらおうよ。
それが私のスパルタ式ジョークってやつよ。
うふふじゃねえよ。
Not funny, Kazuki. You're one to complain about my jokes being in bad taste. When I closed my eyes for a moment in exasperation, my head drooped to the side. My body was urging me to collapse. That was more than enough for tonight. Tomorrow would probably be another brutally hot day. See, they even said so. It's another brutally hot day. How would it be not possible to start a forest fire? This is why some of the stuff that is happening doesn't make sense sometimes. But for the moment, the night breeze was chilly against my skin. Following Kazuki into our tent, I wrapped myself tightly in my sleeping bag and within minutes sunk like a stone into oblivion. And besides, even if we couldn't start a forest fire, say the forest is moist enough that after like a couple of minutes the fire would be extinguished. If you can at least just make yourself like an area where there's no thick forest, I feel like it would be noticeable, especially by people with helicopters. I feel like a lot of the stuff that's going on here is purposefully made so that, you know, the end result is only Amane is going to survive. I feel like there would definitely have been some ways for all of them to survive, but I don't know. It's a bit forced, I feel, right? Alright. And that's enough for this episode. I'm going to take a short break. And we will continue with Amane's angelic howl. This is the third day. This is gonna be the like I said, meat and potatoes of Amane's route. It's gonna be the main event. It's long. It's long. I don't know. I don't actually remember how many days they're gonna be stranded here, but it's gonna be quite a long ride. And like, holy shit, just one episode is only one single day. I don't know how many episodes Amane's route is gonna last. I do want to get to Sachi's route though. But alright, hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Give it a like if you like it. And subscribe, I guess. And yeah, we don't have to worry about any sex scenes. So the only thing that you guys on Patreon will receive is just, you know, early access episodes. So once this is done and I process the episode so that it's compressed, I will be uploading this to Patreon. But for people on YouTube, this will be up on Friday. I'm gonna take a short break and I will record a new episode. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.